This is the fourth attempt for tonight to make a video. I've tried several of them. I've recorded well over an hour of footage, and it's all just been, it hasn't been particularly good. And so I'm going to try again, and I've kind of given up on the idea of talking about any fun stripper stories. I will post some very soon. I'll probably just post one on the off week because I promised you guys I was going to do one this Thursday, and I've tried to do one this Thursday, and I've believe me, I've tried. I've made at least 2 videos. One was about 20 minutes long. The other was a half hour long. Neither one of them was something I would want to be posting on the internet. It was just too discoordinated, too rambly, and just not particularly good. So, I mean, rather than post crap, I'm just going to try and post a video about a story that I can at least keep cohesively together. Even if it's not stripper related. I wanted to talk about my own ectopic pregnancy, because I was talking with somebody today, and they raised an interesting point. People who are pro-life generally don't talk about ectopic pregnancy unless they're extremely pro-life and they believe things like this idea that you can reimplant an ectopic pregnancy, which is entirely untrue. It has never been done. And I mean, I was listening to this one OBGYN, she's got a video, and she was talking about it, and I'd completely forgotten about the fact that when you remove the baby from the tube and you try to magically get it to implant inside the uterus, which is not something that you can do because it's part of the baby's process of growth. So when it's a blastocyst, which is part of the development of the baby from an egg to a zygote to a blastocyst to an embryo to a fetus. Sorry about that, guys. The cat knocked over the camera. Because that's the kind of day I'm having. Anyway, blastocyst is one of the steps in that process. And so the blastocyst, that's when it attaches to the uterine wall. I believe that's the tiny ball of cells that everybody's like, oh, when you have an abortion, you're just getting rid of a tiny ball of cells. Well, there is a period where it's a tiny ball of cells, but that's before it's implanted into the uterus. Once it implants into the uterus, things start moving very quickly because it's got a ready blood supply to help power its growth. If you take a baby out of the fallopian tube and try to reimplant it into the uterus, it's already gotten past that stage. It's already past the stage where it's implanting. It's already implanted. So you can't just like scoop it out and drop it into the uterus like a fish from one bowl of water to the next. But when you do that, you cut off its blood supply, so then it doesn't have any blood. So basically you kill it the moment the blood supply ends. So there is really no way to do it. Like, these are things that I didn't even take into account. I looked at it and was like, how are you going to remove the excess fallopian tissue so that you don't have rotting tissue on your fetus? Well, it's not a fetus at that point, it's an embryo. Rotting tissue on your embryo, like, how do you get that to work? And it's not even that simple. Like, you have to cut off the blood supply. So you really literally have to do something magical. Once we figure out how to do like entire whole brain transplants into new bodies, I'm sure it will seem like a simple thing, but at this point we really haven't figured that sort of thing out. We haven't figured it out yet. But a lot of people don't necessarily, if they're paying any kind of attention to the pro-life, pro-choice argument, they're not necessarily paying attention to, like, most people are not paying attention to ectopic pregnancies because they just assume you can't do anything about that. There are some people who advocate for what's called expectant management of an ectopic pregnancy. That's not necessarily a good idea. I made a whole other video about that, so I'm not going to talk about it here, but I did want to talk about my own experience because people do have ectopic pregnancies, and you can't save the baby. And when I got pregnant, my husband and I, we wanted to put off getting pregnant for about a year after we were married so that we could just have some time for us to bond and form a really strong pair bond. Like, that was our goal. And we did that, and it was fantastic. It was a wonderful time, just me and him. We, you know, we just enjoyed each other's company, and it was quite lovely. But then after our first anniversary, you know, our first wedding anniversary, I started getting a little bit of an itch, like, hey, let's have a baby. Let's do that. You know, I'm young. I'm at the height of my fertility. Let's do it now, because this is the time biologically that we should be doing this sort of thing. And I was a little antsy to get a jump on that, because I was 26 or 27, let's see. 26 at the time, I think. And I really, really, really wanted to not put it off any later than I had to, because I would have liked to have like been getting pregnant at the age of like 25. So we tried for a little while, and we got pregnant, and I was incredibly happy. I was terrified because I was afraid of being a parent. I was one of those people who was afraid to be a mom. I was terrified, and I was so happy. And like, I mean, you look at the little positive, you know, pregnancy test, and you just, you know, it filled me with joy. I had no negative feelings about it. You know, I've heard so many abortion stories from women where it's like, oh, I got the abortion, and, you know, I got excited, but I was also sad because I knew I couldn't keep it, and all these different emotions that, you know, conflicting emotions that people who have abortions feel. With that pregnancy, it was my very first pregnancy, and I was just so excited and so happy. And I didn't know what was going to happen in the future, because I'd never had a baby, and I didn't have relatives who had small babies, and I knew I wanted to have a baby, but I didn't know if I was going to be a good parent. And so I had all those kinds of conflicting emotions, but it was always like, you know, let's do this. And I was surprised very, very quickly at how attached I got to my own baby. You know, up until that point, the baby idea was this like blurry concept in the future, like, let's have a baby. And then I got pregnant with that baby, and it was like, yes, I want this baby. This is what I want. And, you know, I used to talk to him, even though I think it was a him. I can feel sometimes when I'm pregnant if it's going to be a boy or a girl, and I'm surprisingly accurate with that. I've been able to guess them all. And, I could tell it was a boy. It felt like a boy. And I would talk to him, and, you know, I knew he couldn't hear me because he was like only like 4 weeks into his development, but I talked to him because I wanted to be a good mom. And then the bleeding started. And I looked at it, and it was like, well, that could be, you were just all over the place tonight, aren't you? I looked at it, and it was like, well, that could be implantation bleeding. You know, that's a thing. That's a thing. And I looked up, you know, bleeding in the first trimester, bleeding early in pregnancy, because my mom actually had some, every once in a while you have what's called breakthrough bleeding. You know, there's different kinds of bleeding you can have. And obviously the first thing that came up when I described my symptoms was ectopic pregnancy, and I was like, it's not going to be that. It's not going to be that. Not my baby. Nope. That's not what it's going to be. I like to think that I'm a moderately rational individual. I like to think that I'm able to look at things that are unpleasant and be realistic and be honest about them. That was one thing I just couldn't look at. That was one thing I absolutely couldn't face. It was something I couldn't even contemplate. Not my baby. My baby isn't going to die. My baby's going to be okay. And that was as far as I got. I just didn't look any farther. I called up the doctor's office to schedule my first pregnancy checkup. I told them, okay, I'm pregnant. I think my last period was about this point in time. And they told me that it was going to be another about 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks before I could go in, because they usually schedule their first pregnancy checkup at 8 weeks, because that's when they can do the ultrasound and figure out where the baby is, if it's in the uterus, where in the uterus, how it's developing, is there a heartbeat, you know, all that. And because it's really cool, because I've done that. They have the ultrasound up, and it's a blurry image, but you can see this little tiny blinking dot, and that's your baby's heartbeat. And that's really all you can see of your baby. you look at this grainy image, because it's not necessarily a high-tech ultrasound they use. They're just identifying whether it's a heartbeat. And if they see the heartbeat easily on that grainy footage, they don't have to do anything more complicated or more expensive. But because we have, this is something else that a lot of pro-life people don't understand. We have amazing ultrasound technology that's highly detailed, but they don't use that for your basic, is there a baby in there or not kind of ultrasound. So, you know, when you get your first ultrasound, it's just the simple low-tech stuff, and it's just this little blinking dot in a grainy screen. And that blinking dot is so precious and so exciting. And anyway, I had to wait until the 8-week mark, and they asked me if, you know, they were asking me questions, and I kind of skirted around the fact that I'd been bleeding and that I'd had cramps, because I just figured they're implantation cramps, and the bleeding is just implantation bleeding, and it's going to go away, and it's not going to be a big deal. It's not that big a deal. It's not going to be a problem. The baby's going to be fine. The baby's going to be fine. And the pain started getting worse. And I mean, it's internal organ pain. It's not a mild thing. I remember I was talking with one of my friends at work, because I was still going to work. I was still dancing. I was talking to him, and the pain hit me all of a sudden, and I just went blank. Like, it would come and go, and sometimes it was worse than others, and it hit me that time, and I went completely blank. I lost track of what I was saying. I just kind of stared off into the distance for a minute, and then it was like, okay, what was I talking about? You know, what was I saying? I kind of got lost there for a minute. And I remember the look on his face. Like, this guy, he was a good friend of mine, actually, and he was a retired Marine who was working, at this point he's moved up to manager. He's a manager in a strip club now. I remember the look on his face. He was just looking at me, and he could tell something had gone very wrong with me. And I was still just insisting to him that everything was fine. And I was insisting to my husband that everything was fine. I was insisting to everybody around me, everything is fine. And I remember there was one day I went into the bathroom because I was tired and I hurt and I was bleeding, and I was worried about the baby, and I was getting scared because I was bleeding more and more. And I hadn't even ruptured yet. I was just bleeding. I was in the bathroom, and I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I was basically telling myself to shape up, you know, get over it and get out there and go do your job, and, you know, don't fucking whine about this. Just get back out there and keep going. That's what you got to do. Just do what you got to do. And I stepped back out of the bathroom, and I remember there was just a minute. I was standing alone, and I had that look on my face. There's a look on people's faces. You can see it sometimes. It's a look of, people's faces look a certain way when they're going to die, and they know it. When they realize they're going to die, there's a look. It's a fear. It's a fearful look. And I had it on my face, and I could feel my face forming that look. It was the only time I wore it. My husband didn't actually see it, because I was talking to my husband at home, and I was like, yeah, everything's fine. Everything's fine. It's fine. It's all fine. But I was alone for just a minute, and I had that look on my face, and my coworker saw it, because I was going to the club just constantly to earn money to build up a nest egg for the baby. And he saw it, and he knew what that look meant, because he'd seen people, you know, I assume he's seen people dying. And it's a very specific look. It's a unique kind of facial expression. I've seen it on paintings sometimes when people are picturing, there was a painting I saw at one point of some people who were about to be executed, and I saw it on the painting, the look in one of the people's eyes. I was like, I know that look. And I saw it in a photograph. I was online, and this thing popped up on my feed, like, you know, creepy photographs of people who were about to die, and I was like, yeah, I'm bored. I clicked on it, and I was looking at the photographs, and There was a woman who was, I guess her murderer took a picture of her right before she was murdered, and she had that look too. It's an actual look. You can see it on people's faces, and I had it. And I could feel it. And the truth is, I was going to die. Ectopic pregnancies kill women. They kill people, which is the reason they're not included in the umbrella of abortion law. Abortion law usually, except with this Ohio thing that came up just recently, they don't count ectopic pregnancies as an abortion because it's not a viable pregnancy. It's not inside the womb, and it will kill you. And mine was killing me. Like, the baby wasn't dying. It wasn't resolving itself on its own. He was growing. He was doing great. He was getting nice and big and plump. And it was killing me. And I was becoming more and more aware of it. I remember I was in the bathroom one day, and I was trying to do something in the bathroom, and I had a chalazion in my eye. And a chalazion is not like a sty. A sty is it's basically a pimple on your eye. A chalazion is actually a mound of scar tissue that builds up on your eye. And I thought it was a sty, and so I was trying to pop it with a needle because it was annoying me. Little things were driving me nuts that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. I was carefully just not thinking about what the pregnancy might be, what might be happening with that. So all of a sudden, this chalazion becomes like the biggest issue in my life. And so I had a sewing needle, and I was going to like prick it open to try and drain out the pus because I thought it was just a sty. I thought it was an overglorified pimple. And I remember I just couldn't do it. I had the needle in my hand, and I realized I just didn't have it in me to do it. And that's another indicator that you might be dying, when you feel like you just don't have the strength of spirit to do something unpleasant or painful, or even just uncomfortable, you know. And I could feel that. And I started crying because I just assumed it's because I'm pregnant and I'm hormonal, and it's not what you think it is. It's just not. It's not that. It's not that thing. It's not the obvious thing. It's not that. It can't be that. So finally, I remember as we were coming up to the 8-week appointment, like I was in so much pain. There was one point at which I didn't go into work, and my husband and I stayed home, and we binge watched Attack on Titan, which was an interesting TV show. It was grim and morbid, but you know, it was interesting. It was interestingly written. It was an interesting concept for a story. So we're watching that, and I curled up in his lap, and I was in so much pain that I just curled up into the fetal position in his lap, and I watched the TV show with him, like sitting in my husband's lap, just waiting for time to pass, because it was almost time for my first appointment, and everything was going to be okay after that first appointment, right? So we went in, and I greeted the doctor, and it was the first time I'd ever met him. And, you know, I was very cheerful and happy because I was expecting a baby, and everybody was cheerful and happy too. You know, oh, you know, we're pregnant, we're going to have a baby. This is awesome. This is awesome. I'm a little concerned because I've had a tiny bit of bleeding, and I don't know if that's normal or not. And I'm a little concerned about it because I want to make sure the baby's okay. But, you know, other than that, this is awesome. This is wonderful. And the doctor started doing that little grainy ultrasound to make sure that the baby's heart was beating and everything was in the right place. And he didn't find the baby in my uterus. And when he didn't see the baby in my uterus, he reached up and he grabbed the screen on the ultrasound and he pulled it away from me so that I wouldn't see anything that would haunt me later. And he started looking and looking and looking, and he found the baby. And the baby wasn't where he was supposed to be. And so he told me he was going to do some tests and do some blood work and make absolutely certain that everything was what it appeared to be. He did the blood work and brought me back in the next day, and he was like, yeah, it's definitely ectopic. We are going to have to do surgery to remove your tube. We're going to have to take out the entire thing. Baby, tube, everything. We can't, at this rate, at this late period of pregnancy, there's no other treatments that we can do. Normally we would be able to treat with cancer drugs. we can't give you cancer drugs. You're too far along. It could burst any day now. And so he sent me home that night with, when they do abdominal surgery, you have to use a special wash on your abdomen to really, really sterilize it. And so they gave me the special wash and a set of instructions and told me not to eat anything after a certain time. And I couldn't sleep, so I got on, we had an exercise machine, and I got on that and I listened to music, and I exercised, and I felt the pain, and I just wish for any way out of that situation. I wish there was anything I could do, any way that I could save him. Anything. Anything. There had to be something. There had to be some kind of miracle in all this that would save my baby. Something. There had to be something. And of course, I did what I normally do. I read everything I could find on the internet. I read the story about the magical doctor who saved a baby by transplanting it, which ended up being a complete piece of shit. I read that. I read everything. And there was nothing that could be done. So I went in for the surgery the next day, and I'm talking with my husband. I was like, with only one tube, how am I supposed to get pregnant? You know, how am I going to have a baby after this? What if the other tube's shot too? What am I going to do? You know, what if I just don't have working reproductive organs? You know, what if this is it? You know? And he was sitting there with me and trying to keep me calm, because I was beyond upset. I was beyond upset. And then they got me into the room and started prepping me for the surgery, and I had to go in alone, but they were going to have my husband join me as soon as they'd done the prep work. And so they had my husband join me a little while later. But while I was waiting for him to join me, I remember the room. I remember looking around it and memorizing every single detail of that little room, the surgical prep area, and just desperately, desperately wishing that someone would come and save my baby. Anybody. There had to be someone. There had to be something someone could do. Somewhere. Someone had to come and save my baby. Someone. And what I didn't realize at that time was that there was a miracle. There was some magical savior coming. They were coming to save me. But there was no power on earth that could save my baby. Nothing. Nothing that could save him. Only me. And it's an amazing thing that we have the technology that we have, and that we can save women who have ectopic pregnancies, because there was a time not all that long ago that there was nothing that could be done, and the women would just die. And in third world countries, even to this day, the women just die. They just bleed to death in pain and agony and sadness. And that's all there is. And they saved me. And my husband took me home. And I lay in bed for a while, and then when I was getting well enough to walk, he took me out walking in the parking lot of our apartment building. And it was abdominal surgery, so I could barely walk. It took a while to get my strength back up, and then when I was strong enough, I went back to work. And the scars were healed, but they weren't the swelling hadn't gone down, so they were healed sufficiently that I could go to work, but I still had these giant, puffy, swollen areas on my stomach, on my abdomen. And you know, the abdomen is one of the places that men in strip clubs look. They pay attention to your abdomen. They pay attention to the hourglass of your figure. They pay attention to indicators of health. So I got a bunch of really tight body dresses that would cover up my stomach, and I danced at work in those, just covering up my stomach and keeping it as covered as possible so that people couldn't see the swollen indents on my stomach where they had removed my baby. And I mean, eventually I got well enough that I could try again for another baby, and that was upsetting because, you know, my husband and I didn't know if we would have another baby, if we'd have another ectopic pregnancy and need to have another surgery, and we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if I was fertile or not. And then we had my daughter, and she was beautiful. She came out looking like a little angel. She was perfectly healthy. And shortly after that, I tested positive for a precancerous lump. And so it was like a stage 3 precancerous lump. So I was just about to develop cancer. And they put me in pre-op to remove the cancerous lump. And they ended up sticking me incidentally, just coincidentally, in the same pre-op room that I had been in when I lost my baby. And I remember sitting in that room and looking around at the room, and I had I think a 3-month-old daughter or a 2-month-old daughter at that point. And I remember looking around the room, and of course when you're back in the place that the thing happened, you know, the memories are just very vivid. And I looked around, and everything in my life had changed. I wasn't sick anymore. I wasn't dying anymore. And the same nurse came and talked to me and prepped me for the surgery. And so I was telling her about a year ago, I was in here and I had an ectopic pregnancy, and I was losing my baby, and I had no hope, and I was just so full of despair. And I got to have another baby, and that baby survived. She got to be born, and I got to be a mom. And then I had another baby, and then I had another baby. And you know, I came to this place of acceptance about what happened. You don't get to save every baby. You don't get to keep everybody in your life alive. And I've seen that in other ways in my life. I saw that with my parents. I saw that on the ambulance when I was working on the ambulance. We had a patient die. She coded, and we got called because she coded. And by the time we got there, she was cold, and we couldn't revive her. You can't save everybody. But the people that you can save, the people you can keep alive, the people who get to live and manage to stay alive, those are the people who are important. It doesn't mean that my first baby wasn't important. He was very important. He meant a great deal to me. I wish I could have met him. I wish I could have met the baby that I aborted. I wanted to meet him. I wanted to see him. I wanted to hold him in my arms. You can't save everybody. Some people you just can't save. And an ectopic pregnancy, you definitely can't save. One of these days, perhaps we'll have the technology to do crazy things like reimplant an ectopic pregnancy and transfer a baby from a mother who doesn't want it to a mother who does desperately want it. Maybe we can do all that someday, but right now we don't have that power. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Where, you know, it's life-threatening and you can't save the baby, and you can't, you know, it's too, my Goodness, you guys. Behave yourselves. If it's